We are lighting the candle, a world that works. And I'm Bill Carell. I'm here with two of my besties, Jan Jeremias and Lisa Sheehan. And every week we get together and we have conversations. And typically we talk about a word or two, and then we share experiences and just our philosophy on life and what we've read and heard. And our goal is to lead you on a journey that you can then take on yourself, which is called your path to empowerment. And that means having empowerment whenever and wherever you seem to need it. Break glass and get empowerment kind of deal. So we've done this now for almost 2 full years, it seems. And I wonder, as we go forward, uh, we just don't ever seem to run out of things to talk about or ways to express ourselves. So, having said that, I think today what I'm interested in talking about is, or maybe taking a look at the notion of sharing and, let's say, not sharing. Right? There are lots of synonyms or other words that you know can be used in place, and based on that. One thing to share before we move on. You know who Stephen Wright is, right?
The comedian?
The comedian, the stand-up comedian. He is
Yeah.
just really offbeat.
Yeah.
And so he does a series of one-liners. And one of them was, what's a synonym for thesaurus? I love that. I mean, that is so Eastern philosophy koan kind of thing, right? So, as we're talking today, maybe we can interject and swap words around and make it go wherever you want it to go, or change the subject entirely. This hour is a very special time for us to share.
I was looking up the definition. So to share is have a portion of something with another or others, give a portion of something to another or others, use, occupy, or enjoy jointly with another or others.
Hmm.
So the common, which I don't know, is kind of weird. Synonyms are partake and participate.
Yeah, that the self-help movement that started back in the '70s in California. When I first heard that, the definition of sharing with them was to talk to speak out loud and say something that everyone else could just, evaluate, appreciate, whatever. And the the sentence at the end, no matter what anybody said, was always, "Thank you for sharing."
Hmm. See those wheels turning, Jan.
Yeah, no. They were, because I think in my world where I work with a lot of business, people will talk about sharing even information or um, a tool or something because it has a kinder feeling than saying I'm selling you something. I'm going to share this with you. So that's what I was thinking of. I was thinking of that um, softer way around what you really want to do.
Yeah.
And sometimes you wish people would just be upfront and say what they want versus just try to deviate around what is really there.
That brings up sex. We had a woman from the South that she had a really, really heavy, thick accent from the South. And that's when she would always say when she was pissed, when she was mad. Let me share something with you. Yeah. Yeah.
Funny. So you think about, the commonplace usage, and for a word to have so many different applications,
Mm.
my heart goes out to the Chinese people who come here and try to learn our language, because the context is everything, and intonation of the voice and all that. But we can ride share. We can share a moment. We can have a share of stock. We can have our share of the pie. We can take what we have and share a little bit all the way around, and that probably just scratches the surface of all the different ways that share can be used. Then there's also Sonny and Cher. Good luck with
Ba-dum-bum.
that.
Stephen Wright.
No Stephen Wright. Yes. My favorite one is where he gets on the elevator and he presses the button to Pittsburgh.
I love he said if you put an air conditioner, a humidifier, and a dehumidifier in a room, which one would win?
Yes.
But anyway, I mean, sharing too is like sharing. How much do you share? I mean, even amongst friends and family, um, of yourself. How much do you let people know about you, or how much does people share with other people share with you? Because like people can consider things gossip, which is sharing information, and other times, the theory is like talking about another person with a person, it actually kind of gets you closer to that person if you're sharing something with them that only or but so there's a fine line between being gossip and being connections. So it's all sharing in different levels. I have friends that I share some things with, and others that I wouldn't dare share that part of me with. And then there's some people that I can share almost everything with. And then there's some people that I'm simply acquaintances and we just share a similar like for something.
Sure.
That's what I was thinking of, Lisa. I was thinking of sharing experiences or common experiences, which that form of sharing unites you with somebody a lot of the time. If you've shared a certain experience or a certain lifestyle or certain life things that have happened, it unites you with that. And there's also the sharing of space with someone. I just collaborated on a workshop and we shared space, or
even shared history. I mean, that's a
right.
common bond, that brings out such a familiar belonging feeling that you're with people that you don't have to explain a lot of things that you went to high school with or you grew up with, or the years can pass but the connection never does. So it's true, but I mean you can use that word in so many ways, but I guess it ultimately comes down to it still means sharing something with another, whatever form that might take.
So the neat part of it, there's an implicit volunteering of the share, as opposed to somebody taking a portion from you,
True.
And I always love listening to politicians talk about the taxing, completely undefined yet never attainable fair share that the rich have to pay in terms of their taxes. No matter how much they pay, it's still not their fair share, is it?
Not
Who
throughout
knows what
history.
their share would be?
Right. Historically, no, nobody ever claimed that.
Absolutely. And the really fun part of it is that, if you look deeper into it, the words, they're nonsensical, they mean nothing, they convey nothing except for coming from scarcity. Like someone is retaining more than they should. And yet, so in a large family, what would your fair share be?
That's very subjective. It's right. So everything is subjective. So
Yeah.
especially when somebody else is telling you what your share should be, like you just said, it's not It's usually a voluntary action. So when somebody enforces a certain share, yeah, that's where all the troubles come in, I guess.
Yeah, it's more interesting. Whatever speak it is that came from George Orwell's 1984 or Animal Farm or all these ones where they're talking about a collective. That all animals are equal except for some are more equal than others. So now we're all going to share. Nice language, put a good face on it. What could go wrong? So, Lisa, when you looked up, did you happen to see any antonyms for share?
I don't like to do that. I'll see if there's, oops, another dictionary.
I can tell you, my younger sister was brilliant. She had a wonderful practice where after Easter was over, a younger sister and older brother than her, they were the last ones to always finish their Easter candy. And so her deal was well, let's put them all in one basket. So she had next to nothing in her basket, and everything would go into the basket, and it would be, now we'll share.
Mhm.
Brilliant.
Mhm.
Absolutely brilliant.
I would have gotten, because I'm the one that likes to be last. So I wouldn't have done well in that situation. Okay, the opposite of sharing is withholding, censorship, concealment, keeping, silencing, squashing, and suppression.
A little bit of hiding going on in there too, I would think.
Did I say that? I said that.
It's,
No,
it's
no
almost,
idea.
yeah, it's like a U-turn back to what you were talking about, those things that you typically hide from other people, but you share with special people, which
Yeah,
makes them part of the gang.
right.
I've also known people, especially Southern women, who would always say, let me let you in on a little secret. And you didn't hear this from me, as they told everybody in the world.
Right. Don't
Exactly the
tell
same.
anyone. Keep it amongst us.
Keep it amongst yourself.
Yeah. Yep. Bless your heart.
That's always a good one.
So there's sharing, and then there's overbearing sharing.
Are
When
you talking
somebody,
about? uh, Go ahead.
after the sales model again,
Oh, okay.
when someone's sharing with you, you can walk away, right? You can decline. When somebody is overbearing sharing, I just made that up. There is an implicit, contract that you will listen until I'm done talking. And no, there won't be any Q&A.
Look, there could be a lot of oversharing in so many aspects. I mean, I know parents that share too much with their children, parents that don't share enough with their children, and both can have adverse effects on the children. So sharing comes in all levels, I guess, and then to find the exact formula is probably the conundrum of life, or they should put it in the manual.
Which is kind of interesting, doesn't that kind of bear out in how sharing gets decided? It's always someone else who sets the rules. Oh,
I
come
think you
on now.
think
We're all sharing here. So,
I know.
give it up.
I think you think that, that's what people tell you ideally is that it's for the better. It's all for the good of, it's for the good of all that we're sharing this kind of thing, but I mean, ultimately, it like you said, it's your decisions. So you can I mean, that comes down to human nature again. So, we'll get to the point where, you could either go reptilian and do the fight, flight, or freeze thing, or just stand up to it, I guess, which is the fight part. So,
It's not often that you see reptiles sharing, is it?
no, they don't like to, especially a sunny rock.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is my rock. Get your own rock.
No, I'm just thinking of animals in general. I mean, depending on their environment. I mean, I don't know that, you know, I don't know if I would chance giving, Tonka has stood his own when he has a bone and someone else comes over
No
and
sharing going on there.
no sharing. And then we went to visit a friend who was dog sitting and Tonka went to drink out of the dog's bowl. And boy, was there like a little scuffle there that was
Mhm.
just like, this is mine.
Yeah.
And so that territorial aspect of that animal instinct of being very territorial.
Very heartwarming when they break through that, though, isn't it? When a couple of animals just finally, decide that, yeah, you're okay in my space, I'm okay in your space. Let's get together. Especially if they're two animals of grossly different size. It's kind of a wonderful thing to see.
I think that, I mean, depends on like, I mean, I could take anything from him. He's not going to come after me. I'm
Right.
take a bone out of his mouth if I had to. I don't know that anybody
Mhm.
else could, but I could.
Well, I'm remembering when we had our dog, we also had a litter of kittens, and those kittens would crawl all over that dog. And you would think, with their little sharp claws clawing up face and hanging off of ears and all the rest of that stuff, she would also just do this kind of gnawing thing, where a little cat head goes into the mouth, but no damage gets done. And everybody's trusting everybody. There's like that, you know, the Maxwell Smart chief cone of silence, where there's a trust perimeter that's been established, and that seems like that's very important for true sharing.
Absolutely. I mean, I look at Tonka with my cats, and there definitely was. They used to like he grew up with them. They were there when he got there. And but there would be a limit because every now and then he would let out this very low, like kind of and it would be like, okay, I've had enough. I need my space and I need to, and they would just know better. They were like, okay, he means business. We got to leave him alone. And they wouldn't stop him from coming back and laying on top of him later on or just giving him a little like not doing what they were doing and then going to sleep on him.
Yeah.
But there were very clear boundaries, which is when you were talking, Lisa, about sharing and sharing too much or sharing too little.
I think, yeah, animals might have a better sense of how to create boundaries.
That's right.
I was listening to a podcast, a woman that wrote a book about boundaries and how non-versed we are in creating boundaries and keeping them. And the fact is that if you do create boundaries, it actually makes you closer to people because they know exactly where you stand.
Mm-hmm.
And I was never brought up that way. I mean, I didn't even know there was really such a thing as boundaries so much. I mean, I know probably simplistic ones that I just knew inherently, but not how to tell somebody what I do and don't like to the point of, and if you do this, then there will, this is what will happen kind of thing. Or to
And
hang out with people and not want to, just to say, I'm sorry, but I don't like to do that. And I'm not going to do it anymore.
yeah,
I'm not the one to go to the sports things with you, even though that is me, but
or eat raw red meat, or something like that. But if you think about, what boundary is it something that you can weigh or touch, or does it have mass and dimension? Does it cast a shadow? I mean, can you do an X-ray of it and tell that it's a boundary? A lot of things like sharing and boundaries that are part of what we do every single week are tools of linguistics, and they actually describe something that's more theoretical and less, you can't go out and count how many boundaries there are in the world, you know. And for instance, anytime you go to a state line to see where the boundary is, unless you happen to be on a major highway where it tells you that the state ends here and the next one starts here, you can't see it, you know? So we didn't have a notion of boundaries. That word was probably never used in my family of 8 people, at least up through the first dysfunctional part of our lives, where it was pretty much like Lord of the Flies, you know, get what you can get, use whatever guile you have, be charming when it's appropriate, and you're going to get hit anyway. So who cares? And now that may or may not be true, but the seemings of somebody like who's 12 years old or less, and the whole notion of your sister's screaming, so give her the rest of your ice cream. Um, she doesn't get that there are any boundaries, and again, you have to have a certain level of intellect and understanding and language and linguistics to even appropriate for yourself and start playing with what would a boundary look like. Like, is it going to make you really unhappy if I tell you I don't want to go watch a sports game with you? Or is there a rule that basically says I can tell you what my boundaries are, and A, you have to live with them, and B, you cannot sass back?
The thing is, you don't have to live with them.
Hmm.
You could opt out or withdraw from that relationship or situation if you don't like the boundary enough,
Or
and
negotiate.
or negotiate, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, my niece was a great negotiator when she was little.
Oh, yeah.
She should have become a lawyer, we used to say. Everything was a
Absolutely.
everything was a negotiation when she was small. It was really funny, but yeah, or negotiate.
I
Yeah.
think it has a bad rap, the term, I think. You know, boundary sounds like you're setting up walls not to let anybody in,
I
and
agree.
ultimately that's not what what I was listening to. That's not what they were specifically talking about. They were talking about letting people know exactly who you are and what you liked, how you relate to other things and people. And if I was trying to think of some perfect example, but if you don't like to do something and then you're both miserable when you're together doing it, and then you finally come out and say, "Look, I just don't like going to the open mic nights at the comedy club. It's not my thing. So let's do something else."
Mhm.
And so you're both miserable, and you don't, and then the other person inviting you doesn't even know why you're miserable because you never told her or him. So it's kind of cool to think of them as ways to communicate with each other that you actually are sharing what you really like, instead of trying to pretend that you're always up for anything or everything suits you.
Yeah, I'm still letting the whole notion of boundaries and behavior sink in just a little bit,
I could
because
see it.
sometimes it might be, I just don't wanna go to open mic night with you. You may
Oh, and
be
that's
in there another
exact
night with somebody else, but not
that's
for us.
entirely true too, and then you'd have the right to tell me right back, or but
Yeah.
then why are you inviting me?
Right.
Let's hang out with boundaries for a minute or two. What have you got for, definition on that bad
Yeah,
boy?
that's what she's gonna do.
Well, I was
Because
thinking
we
about
definitely have to talk
I was
in terms of sharing over a boundary, or that there is no boundary when you're sharing, or something of that nature.
but I'm also thinking of the fact that at some points, the pushing of boundaries, like when someone knows the boundaries and they still push and I'm back to Tonka because he knows the rules and the boundaries at my house. But with my situation lately, he's been pawned off. He's been visiting a lot of friends and he definitely does things there he would never do at home, ever. Like, he
Yes.
knows I won't stand for it. Like, he would never put his paws on the table and look for food. I mean, ever in my house. But, I guess he must do it at their house because they said something. But when I'm there, he kind of looks at me and I kind of give him a look and he's like, "Oh, okay, mom's here. I know better," kind of thing.
Yeah, I love it. That look on his face that basically, "Oh, this is a table? I've never seen one of these before. Look at
That's
me put
right.
my paws up here."
Right. Right. And so as you sit there and I'm thinking boundaries, and kids do the same thing all the time. It's like, but that's a way of growth. It's like you have to push the boundaries and then see what happens. And then you kind of step back and say, okay, well, that was not, that was, I liked that freedom or whatever, or it wasn't worth the consequences of stepping over that boundary.
Kinda interesting too, and underneath the boundaries, what's the motivating energy? What's the goal of creating a boundary? If it's not to share with somebody after something just happened that you didn't like, and basically say, "Hey, how about we conspire, not to relive that experience," you know? And then find out, yeah, absolutely. I wanted to say something to you, but I didn't want to break your heart because it looked to me like you were having the time of your life while you were crying.
Well, I think boundaries are safe. Sometimes that safety is necessary and they're protective. And so, I mean, I think of the boundaries that I've created, let's say about around my yoga practice through the years. It's just the knowledge and the wisdom of knowing what I should and shouldn't do for my own health and well being. So, knowing those boundaries, because I know and I've pushed those boundaries and pushed the limits and paid the consequences and then the, injury or growth. And then it's my decision as to whether I expand beyond that.
Yeah.
If I decide that it's worth pushing the boundary or if it's worth saying, okay, well, at this point, that's just not, I'm not willing to be in pain for 3 months, so I'm not going to do it.
So the basic, well, the simplistic definition is a line that marks the limits of an area, a dividing line, a limit of a subject or sphere of activity. But then when it comes to a boundary, definition of boundary in relationship, it says personal boundaries are the limits and rules we set for ourselves within relationships. A person with healthy boundaries can say no to others when they want to, but they are also comfortable opening themselves up to intimacy and close relationships.
I like that.
So
It's a
I know.
a little bit more complete and in-depth look at a term that basically says, on a map, you can see well-described boundaries, and there's really no debating what those boundaries are. However, when people get involved, those boundaries are up for negotiation all of the time. Having things to do with eminent domain and adverse possession and all these other things where somebody can come in and with a really good lawyer change those boundaries by sheer force of will. So if you talk about, having a healthy personal relationship where the boundary is something you share with people like a heads up, you know? And, by the way, if you spend any time with me, you're going to probably realize that I don't like MMA. Okay.
I was
It's not
just going to ask
personal.
you.
Yeah.
No, if you wanted to go to an MMA match.
I would go with you. I would stretch my boundaries for you, Lisa.
Well, any
I'm
lot
not
sporting
a big
event.
fan of anything where people are beating the snot out of each
No,
other. You know,
no, I would not be the first one to fight you to that.
the goal is to render the other person helpless. Where does that fall on the empowerment spectrum?
Right. That's a lot of boundary crossing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and
But I think it kind of sets up like where people stand. People that do have healthy boundaries, you don't have to guess. You just know. And I think that way people trust you too. That's what it comes down to because they know you've established what kind of person you are by telling them what kind of person you are. And then they know for themselves how much they can trust you. And, if you're, it just seems like it makes a lot of sense and something that could use a lot of practice in my life. I know that much. I'd love to practice more boundaries. Um, and I think once you get used to it and then you start doing it, it gets easier too. So, and if you see the results, like like a kid, if the results are positive, and if the results are positive in the fact that you get rid of things that you didn't really like in the first place, so I mean it's kind of like a win-win situation, it feels like.
Yeah. Yeah. The notion of declaring to someone that I do have limits and I want you to know about it. I don't want to just explode, and get triggered in an instant and behave really badly towards you. I could still do that anyway, but I just want you to know it's my intention to give you, a little bit of a warning sign. And if I say I'm going to blow, I probably am going to blow. So you might want to just like back off for a minute or two.
I
And then,
actually had to
yeah,
express a boundary with my father recently,
yeah,
and it's not something my family does. In fact, when I had all these wonderful wonderful to me things to say and points to make, but the second I got him on the phone, he's like, so I expressed one thing and he said, "So how's your sister doing with her knee surgery?" And I went, oh, instantly change of subject.
the tactic that you use with a 2-year old. Play with this toy. Don't scream about the Fruit Loops being gone.
Oh, and that's a classic. I mean, it's how we were confrontation was never, you never talked about it, you never did it. And if it happened, you just ignored it, swept
Yeah.
it under the rug, or changed the subject.
Mhm.
That's an interesting thing going back to, my early memories of upbringing and everything. And this says nothing about my parents, by the way. I just want you to know they were fabulous people. They decided they were going to have 6 kids. They probably should have been examined and figured out boundaries a lot earlier than that, but that's what they decided to do and they pulled it off. So in the meantime, we also learned, hand-to-hand combat, how to use things that had happened years before in any conversation to the best advantage that it gives you leverage in that moment, no matter who gets their heart broken. That was pretty cool. And so, you're talking about how people behave and the whole notion of having boundaries. Well, we had boundaries in that there were none. It kind
Mm,
of didn't make, any difference. And we learned how to say I'm sorry an awful lot.
we didn't even do that.
No, you didn't get to that point, did you?
No, no,
It
nope.
was like having a mouthful of mashed potatoes and no place to spit them, right?
And I adore, like, I would, like, give the same explanation or as you did, like, if you rate your childhood kind of thing, I've seen that question recently, and, I liked my childhood for the most part,
Yeah.
until I realized that not everybody's father acted that way or, that kind of thing, but for the most part, I think I had a great childhood.
Yeah.
But when comparing things and realizing, like, different things that I I realize I'm emotionally stuck at some things because of not being able to express, not facing confrontation, not having boundaries, not having, not a very expressive, affectionate family. There's and then coming into the world and trying to see why these things aren't like that for other people, and how do I fit into that now?
No, that's pretty interesting. Not only were we the Bickersons, but we also had no boundaries in terms of expressing love for each other. And I'm going to tell you what, if we ever were in a situation where there was somebody from the outside picking on any of us, you got us all every single time. No doubt about it. Very, very close that way.
I mean,
And
I
we
think
never
that
talked
depends.
about it. We never
Yeah.
talked about, how family is the most
Oh, no?
important thing in the world. We never said those words.
Oh,
People would just show up, do something inappropriate to one of us, and everybody else would stand up in a line and go, "We're done here."
and then it was over.
Yeah, they got it, funny enough.
Yeah. But did you guys talk about it after that?
What's there to talk about?
Mm.
I mean, when the time comes, we've got each other's back, and there's no point in even discussing that. It's not an option.
Well, Bill, what I feel you're describing is something that was almost innate to you guys. So there was no need for explanation
Yeah.
afterwards because, and maybe for myself, and I don't want to speak for Lisa, where it was so unfamiliar, we would have to debrief. Afterwards, we would have to have a little debriefing session and kind of talk about and rationalize or whatever how everything went and how everything transpired and what happened and what did it mean and whatnot.
Wow.
Well,
How
with
many
with
sib
6 kids, and how many did you have, Jan?
Three. There were three of
3.
us.
Now, see, that would have been like, in my opinion, that would have been like a usual number, because I think back in the 1960s, the average family had 2.3 children. Now, how they had 3/10 of a person in the family, I don't know how they did that, but that's what they said, and we had 6, and my mom had, 3 miscarriages too,
Wow.
Catholic.
And now in the world I travel, most people, in a lot of the worlds I travel, people have a lot of children. So,
For the rest of the world, absolutely.
so they have three children is not a lot at all when the average is six or nine or more. So,
And what's happening with our 20-year-old to 40-year-olds?
My friend's son is in his 30s and wants to get a vasectomy in his early 30s.
Yeah,
He so desperately doesn't want to bring children into the world, or I'm not even sure if it's bringing children or be a parent. I'm not sure which one is a stronger, and he's not in a relationship or anything, but it bothers him that much.
yeah.
and I agree because my brother is works for CUNY and has for 40 years um, in financial aid, IT, admissions, all that kind of stuff. And he said enrollment is so down. And he said part of the reason is because there are so many less college age
Yeah.
kids that are actually population wise that actually go to college. And people 30s and 40s aren't having children, didn't have children.
Hmm.
So
So they're making up for it by by overcharging for education, right?
that's right. Yeah.
Well, I
Because
think
they
that was
said,
the case before this
oh, I
current
know.
situation.
Because they said that because of the huge debt the students are taking on these days, like home ownership and things like that are going by the wayside because they can't afford it. And I mean, and everything that's attached with that. So, taking any, no, they don't want nothing to do with China or old furniture or anything like that. Well, A, because they don't have any place to put it, and B, because they don't really care. But, um, everything that goes with home ownership or being able to buy things once you're out of college is going to go away.
Right.
And so and even automobiles, they don't want to own A, they can't afford one, and B, there's other ways to get around. So that's going to start. It's already dipping, but it's going to start affecting a lot of occupations.
And I think you also have affected sort of what people really wanted to do with their life. Like I have my friends' kids who do go to college are actually looking at what they major in or what they decide to do with their life as to what is going to allow them the ability to pay back that debt if they do
Mhm.
go to college. So they're not going to choose. They might have a profession that they would like to do that is their heart's desire, but doesn't pay anything. So they're not going to do it because they can't afford to do it. So they then switch majors or switch careers because that's not, they're not going to do something which isn't financially going to be allow them to pay whatever, how many hundreds of thousands of dollars back in debt that they are from going to school.
Well, there's an interesting correlation, if not a correspondence, but being a mathematician, I will argue more for correlation. But there's been a rise in tuition and college cost, especially in major universities, non-land grant universities, and is also corresponded with an increase in curriculum that allowed people to have a major in any words they could string together.
Mm.
So I was watching me and YouTube, right? Now I do it with a curious mind and a lot of skepticism, but they were showing over 350 different majors that people are graduating with that have absolutely nothing to do with ever getting a job. And
Mhm.
for this, they're going into debt, in some cases, $100,000, $200,000. And these are not like, some obscure online thing like the University of Kumquat or something of that nature. We're talking about Ivy League schools. We're talking about major universities across the United States, and you get people who are paying the colleges and going into debt for something they'll never get a job with. Now, if the university was concerned about them being paid back, if the university were lending the money, I think they might approach this with a little bit different, a different kind of sharing, don't you think?
That's one of my father's questions all the time. Like, "Where's my guarantee?"
Yeah. Well, back in the day, if you'll remember, I don't know when both of you went to university, but University of Colorado had about 35,000 students every single year, and 13,000 of them were freshmen. By the end of the first semester, 30% of those people were done. By the end of the second semester, another 30% of those people were done. By the end of the second year, half of those people were done. So that when
Mm.
you got to graduation, 1 in 5 for the freshman class actually made it to their senior year and got it was a competitive environment. And no, you couldn't just say, I've got boundaries and I believe an 8 o'clock class is just not going to fit into my boundary, but I do need to have this for my major, right? It was quite a bit different, back in those days. And you know what it cost if you flunked out of school for a year? $1,200. Not life-changing stuff, which I think it made it easier to walk away from in those days, but then they got smart. If we can find ways to keep them until they're juniors and seniors, like 90% of them, we'll get a lot more money. We'll be able to
Yep,
add buildings to the university. This is going to work.
I
And so the
do.
neat part of it is guess what happened in 2009? When it looked like there were going to be like $1 trillion worth of student loans that were going to be defaulted on, Congress said, in arrears, you can't do that. You may not declare bankruptcy to get out of your student loan debt.
Right.
Problem solved, right? And guess who stopped lending money to students? Every major banking institution in the United States. Wells Fargo stopped, Bank of America stopped. They all stopped. So where's the money come from? Interesting story. Something you want to look up. So we're talking before about people making decisions on boundaries and what have you. We're kind of in an interesting place here, um, where I think the playing field starts to possibly look a little bit more like my childhood, my warped view of what my childhood was. I'm taking responsibility for that. Most of the things that I was most traumatized by, I'm sure never happened. Okay. So having said that, what kind of behavior and are we seeing, you know, in our culture at this moment? And will it kind of be a 5, 10 years from now? Will it be really a very special group of people who get to sit around and talk about words? You know, you
The possibilities are there. I mean, I think it's possibilities are always there. I mean, I have a nephew that's a sophomore in college, and he's. I mean, I was actually laughing because he. I was at my sister's Saturday night with my brother-in-law, and my nephew called to tell his parents that what his grade average was going to be for the semester. And I'm thinking to myself, when I was a sophomore in college and it was the weekend of spring vacation, the last thing I was ever doing was calling my parents to tell them my GPA. He was just in the dorm. I mean, he's literally a nerd, which, I love nerds. Grow a nerd. They're the best.
I've been there, done
Yeah.
that.
now they have very tight boundaries and are very expressive about them.
So
Um,
he's so different, and I have hope for the future because he gets so excited about the right kind of things, I guess I could say.
Yeah.
Um, he loves, he loves human nature and he loves being with people. And he when he was in high school, he tried the track team, but he kept waiting for the person that was behind him. So it didn't bode well for the team, but it looked good as far as being a humanitarian.
Kind of comical. That'll show up on YouTube on one of these 20 most amazing demonstrations of sportsmanship.
I mean, that's been on, you've seen those kinds of things even
Yeah.
in, when they're at levels at high competition levels, but
Well, we talk about boundaries, and boundaries are explicitly and implicitly a set of rules, right? And we have what we call a social contract in our culture. And the social contract works to the extent that people understand it, know it, and honor it. It only takes 3.5 to 5% of the population to not do one of those three things or all three of them together for that social contract to be bankrupt. It's the same thing as data integrity in science or data integrity in manufacturing process. 5% exceptions makes the place undoable. People are now walking around with notes in their pocket and they're doing everything off book and they're making it up as they go along. And this is kind of an interesting sort of a correlation. I mean, Jan, can you imagine trying to make decisions about medications knowing that there's a 5% built-in fallacy to the data that you're looking at when most of the decisions come down to a 2 or 3% difference between this and that? Margin of error being greater than that, nobody trusts it anymore. And people go back and default back to what their gut is, and they share from their gut.
which they should. And but then the other end of the percentage is too, if you get, I mean, I'm thinking in the positive arena, if you take what 1.5% of a group of people and they start doing something positive, if they all pray together, if they all meditate together, or things start to happen, it's a small percentage of the population that if you get them, but that's still a lot of people. So to get that many people to agree to do something.
Yeah, and it's an interesting comparison of leverage. It's called what does it take to break a structure down?
Mhm.
5% loss of integrity. What does it take to correct that breakdown? 1.5% of people all doing the same thing. Leading, putting some cultural boundaries back in place again where, hey guys, we didn't just do this because our parents told us to. We did it because it worked. It made sense. It made people's lives better and faster and a lot more empowering.
Or why did we do these things just because our parents told us so? To look at, well, the curiosity factor, or don't accept or reject anything, weigh everything before making a decision for yourself, creating a boundary for yourself.
And again, critical thinking. There is nothing in the universe that you can go and you can point at and it's this big and it weighs that much and it tastes like chicken or whatever. But critical thinking is one more really cool way for you to be caught in a action of inquiry and inquisitiveness. Like, what's the synonym for thesaurus?
Right.
One of the most brilliant questions that I ever heard was when I was growing up. I probably was 17 years old. And my dad worked with a man whose 4-year-old daughter just got into this questioning stage. I mean,
Mhm.
everything was a question. And he'd say, "Man, Vicky is driving me nuts." You know what? Hear what the latest one is? "Daddy, why are rocks?"
Period.
"Honey, what? Why
Question
are
mark.
rocks what?
Yeah.
Why are rocks, Daddy?" It's a pretty simple question, right? The guy's an engineer. He's looking for nouns and verbs and, like a full sentence. And why are rocks was
Did
coming
he
from
come
a
up with an
4-year.
answer?
No, 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 no. This was just an anecdote to share with other adults. I don't know how things went for Vicky because we kind of lost touch with them, but um never did lose touch with Dick. Dick's been a good family for 50, good friend for 50 years. But the point is that not having critical thinking. You can be an engineer and not be a critical thinker. Do you know that?
I would imagine. I
Hmm.
imagine you could be in any occupation and just do what you were told,
Yeah,
follow
there's kind of
procedure.
a truism to the more you've been taught, the more blind you are to the obvious.
Hmm.
Mm.
Your mind will not accept that information as new. It's all familiar, it's all how it is, and it really takes, being disrupted for
Well, I
you
think
to.
sorry, Bill.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
No, I was thinking of when you used that example. I was thinking of, I remember when I was learning, I don't know whether it was trigonometry or calculus or whatever. And in the beginning, you takes 20 steps to solve whatever the problem was. And then you learn one step that does it all. But you can't really go back to doing the 20 anymore
No.
because it's like you forget how. And I think that sometimes we're over taught. And in certain professions, I think they're not given a choice, whether that be because of liability. I'm thinking of the health professions now,
Yeah.
doctors, where they actually have to follow a certain regime or protocol and they can't deviate from that protocol for whatever reason. Insurance won't cover it or whatever, and they're kind of forced into a situation where they can't be critical thinkers.
Sure. The same thing in geometry with theorems and show your work and all the rest of that sort of thing. And so being the class clown at one point, our teacher, Miss Hertzberg, she had also been a nun. And somebody asked her, where she went to school. And how did she decide to become a math teacher? And then I piped up, show your work, which basically is don't leave any details out. And I'm with you, Jan. When we got to you intuitive people can get the answer before they understand the question sometimes. And there's no learning going on there. So I get you got to do the rudimentary. And when we did show the work, the operations made sense. They
Mhm,
were
exactly.
constructive. Yeah. As opposed to some other, techniques of teaching. Do you remember IPA?
Mhm.
It's
What's it stand
International
for?
Phonetics,
Oh.
where they had instead of having an alphabet with 26 letters, it had 52. and it was a combination of AE and dots over the I and all right. So they tried to teach first graders this because they thought it would make it easier for them to be able to sound things out. And all they did was really complicate and obfuscate, the simple things. So like if cat is now 5 letters,
Mhm.
right?
Mm.
So on and so forth. And then we have Common Core, the whole math process for you take this group here, you remove this number, you add these together, you multiply times this, and now you've got a whole page to add a column of 3 numbers. And in what universe does that invite people to learn more? I had a friend who had a theory. He said they're doing this so that the parents can no longer help with homework. We
Why
want a
not?
stronger relationship with them at the school
Yeah.
than the parents have at home. They can't show them how to do these things anymore. Show your work.
Boundaries.
Mhm.
And I guess showing your work is sharing, and sharing is caring. So, well, I think the funny part of it is it's nice to be able to dissect language and our experiences. And there are lost idioms. There are lost things in our culture, that they because they're not being said anymore, it's missing that they're missing. Do you know what I mean by that? Every foreign wave of immigrants that's come to our country over the last 200 years brought with them very interesting, culturally acceptable ways of saying things. And a lot of that made its way into our everyday language, things that we say, and we have no thought for what it means or how it goes. Have you
Oh,
ever heard anybody say "C'est la vie"
see,
and then ask them what it means? I don't know.
you're right. Hey, Sarah, Sarah. But
Yeah,
that's a
exactly.
song too.
When I was just a little girl. So empowerment and sharing and boundaries. I love it when
I
we
think
have these pensive moments.
the, but I mean, I find it interesting how sharing led to boundaries, and that was and it kind of makes sense when you do put them together. So I
Mhm.
think, people are sharing, I don't know, like to think about boundaries that you could set up that are pleasurable, that would make your life nicer, simpler, and your relationships with other people better, instead of looking at it like setting up walls to prevent people from coming in or you reaching out to them. But just to give boundaries a better a chance, put it in a
The
better light.
Yeah, and if you can do it, with a curious mind and with the whole notion of let's play with this and see how let's not make a tool of domination out of this new
No,
language. Because if you do that, I mean, you're like totally missing the boat, right? Whole idea is to identify, where the edge of the cliff is before you get to it, as opposed to cleaning the mess up after you inadvertently fall off or push the person in front of you off.
right, right.
And
Could be
not
fun.
everything, yeah, not everything has the same level of importance either with regard to boundaries, right?
No.
I think being a yoga teacher, I mean, in yoga, we bind ourselves. Literally, you bind yourself. You twist your body or you confine, so you have the feeling of you, so that you know what the opposite is. You know what it's like to expand. So
Yeah.
if you look at boundaries as being, um, walls that help you be who you are, those boundaries, then you have the opportunity to expand within yourself. Like you're more expressing who you are versus
Right.
a limitation. So, I look at it, you could even feel that physically. And
Yeah.
that's why you practice yoga to me, so that it's a tactile or somatic sensation of something that's more esoteric and emotional.
I like what you said, that they bind.
They bind.
And it's almost like what does binding do? It holds the whole together.
Mm-hmm.
And if the binding's not there, it's a different whole. So the game in life is to become adept at naming your bindings so that you're choosing when to change them and not accidentally falling into patterns of habit that are not thoughtful or don't serve you or don't work for the world.
Mm-hmm. Or don't work for your own world.
For sure. And in the meantime, if you're ever using anything as a lever to get somebody else to do something, it's actually counterproductive. And as my friend would say, will you stop that? Will you please just stop that?
How do I stop that? Just stop.
Yeah. You know how to hold your breath? Well, do that with what you're doing.
There you go.
So how are we feeling?
I like boundaries. I like talking about ways to, because if you make your world a little bit better, it affects everything around you. So, and we're just going to go with that theory. If we get 1.5 people to understand that and start going for that, let's work together on our boundaries so that we can be ourselves and let everybody else be themselves too.
And let curiosity drive you into the group that you're actually in. Are you in the 1.5% or are you in the 98.5%?
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because all you have to do is just change the topic and the numbers change dramatically immediately.
Yep.
So any other closing thoughts, friends?
No, I'm also with Lisa. I've now and have been, but now especially have a new appreciation of boundaries.
Me too. I didn't know that I didn't know this much about boundaries.
Yay!
So in terms of boundaries that you may not know about or are not apparent to you, I'm going to close with the same request that I have now for the last 3 or 4 months. And that is, make it your mission today and this week to reach out to somebody in your life. Text, telephone, call, email, Facebook share. Let them know that they matter to you and this world's better as far as you're concerned because they're in it.
Expand your boundaries.
Yes, expand your boundaries. Get some more people into that 1.5%. Love you guys. And that's it for this week's episode of Lighting the Candle, A World That Works.
Have a good week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye for now.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, A World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us each week as well as the rest of the network at exvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.